right, welcome everybody to San Francisco's Search and Destroy today. And we have entered into our 14th week of the California Countercultures course, which is organized under the aegis of the Art and Design here at Berkeley and in partnership with the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archives. And today we have, or this week we've been studying with the students. On Monday we had the machine artist Cal Spelicic come and talk to us about the machine art underground in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and bricolage and DIY. And today we have the great fortune to have Vale and Marion Wallace to speak to us on numerous things, including punk and the underground culture and research publication. V stands for Valhalla, and Vale is in many ways has been called the Andy Warhol of the West Coast. The Washington Post has also referred to him as the Studs Terkel of the underground. He's been referred to as well as one of the most important historians of punk and an anthropologist of the industrial music culture scene. Vale, who's a Japanese American, has long been a fixture in the Bay Area counterculture, where he remarked in some of his earlier years that he was the original outsider because he was one of the only Asian in the underground. So what's really important today, and I'm not sure if you guys know this, but Vale graduated from UC Berkeley in 1966. He was an English major, and his daughter, who I'm not sure is in the audience or not, is currently a junior here at Valentine Marquesa Wallace. Are you in the house? Is a junior here at UC Berkeley. So there are strong ties, the family has strong ties to the campus. When Vale graduated from Berkeley in 1966, he immediately moved to Haight-Ashbury and then later found his home in North Beach, where he and Marion still live today. Vale collaborates with his wife, Marion Wallace, who's a filmmaker, who's the founding member of the rebel underground film collective Know Nothing Cinema. And Marion Wallace began making experimental films as a student at the San Francisco Art Institute, studying with George Kuchar, Gunvor Nelson, and Lawrence Jordan. She also worked as an assistant to Bruce Conner. Her new film, which came out a couple of years ago, entitled The Artists of the Industrial Scene, has been translated into French and has been circulating around the world. Since 1977, Vale has been documenting underground culture, first with his punk zine, Search and Destroy, which he started while working at City Lights Bookstore, and the students know about City Lights Bookstore because we've taught the Beat Generation as part of the class, and certainly we had, there's been a core counter space for this particular course. So he, at City Lights Bookstore, with $100 donated each by Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Vale started his publishing company. In the 1980s, he began the publication of Search and Destroy, a San Francisco-based zine documenting the then current punk subculture, with seed money from Jeff Travis of Ref Trade Records. His Vale's internationally renowned research series, which are all up here on stage. If you have never seen them, touched them, or collected them, please do so as part of your experience today. They're hardback. They're a series of different formats, but primarily identified as hardback magazines of lengthy conversations with subculture icons such as Jello Biafra, William Burroughs, Brian Geisen, Throbbing Gristle, and many others that the students have heard about in this course, this spring course. covering everything from punk to feminist culture to the zine and body modification phenomena. These cult books titles Modern Primitives, Industrial Culture Handbook with Mark Pauline, who will be speaking next week. Actually, Mark Pauline will be speaking here next Wednesday, and the title of his talk is Go Big or Go Home. He'll be speaking with his wife, Amy Critchett. So we have these two couples, collaborative couples, speaking to us. As well, Vale continues to discover and promote whatever he finds interesting, ranging from obscene books such as Octave Mirbeau's The Torture Garden, which is translated by Research. Vale introduced the British science fiction writer J.G. Ballard to the United States, whom Vale does consider the William Burroughs of England, with the Atrocity exhibition. And most recently, Vale, Marion, and I collaborated on the Bruce Conner Afternoon Interviews, a 30-year-long interview between Bruce Conner and Vale that is unedited, which was what Bruce Conner had insisted when he began the interviews. And it was published for the first time ever for the occasion of the double MoMA retrospectives, MoMA New York and SF MoMA. The title of that book format came directly from Calvin Tompkins' Marcel Duchamp, The Afternoon Interviews, and Vale considers Duchamp and Conner the most important artists of the 20th century. Research flinches from nothing culture has to offer, and the books are not available in the mainstream, but only available online at research.com and occasionally in independent bookstores and various underground circuits. Vale believes in the freedom of the artist and the importance of reading, and much like Cal Spelacek the other day, the importance of the role of the artist outside of the commercial art world. Along with writing and distributing, Vale tours nationally with Marion, giving lectures about his career and provides guidance to DIY and indie artists and students about book publishing. So feel free to engage in conversation with Vale and Marion. It's with great pleasure to introduce to you two of San Francisco's greats, Vale and Marion. Thank you both for being here. Come on up. Yeah.
We're starting with a film of Vale talking. Give me a second here.
You made the film.
I made a film of Vale talking. So you can see it. There it is. I guess the light should go down.
Hi, I'm V. Vale in San Francisco, and I started publishing Search and Destroy, which documented the emerging international punk rock cultural revolution. And I began in 1977, and I was waiting around, figuring it out, working at City Lights, and punk rock barely started here in late '76. And all the coverage from the local press, papers, weeklies, it was almost universally lies, distortion, oversimplifications, reducing what I knew was a cultural revolution to like 2 words, spitting in safety pins. And I said, this is a bunch of BS. Someone has got to document this movement as it's beginning, because you knew that there was going to be a beginning and an incline and then a decline and then an end, perhaps. Social movements seem to follow this arc. And so I said, I'm going to get in on the beginning, but how shall I do it? You need money to publish. Allen Ginsberg was in town from New York City. I told him what I wanted to do. He didn't even wait for me to ask. He wrote me a check for $100 right on the spot. I showed the check immediately to Lawrence Ferlinghetti. he also wrote me 100 without even asking. And another friend of mine, a bit later, just gave me $200 to help me out. He was working as a doctor. I have to say that there's two factors that changed my life technologically. One was the access to very cheap Xerox machines. This didn't exist much before punk rock. It definitely didn't exist in the hippie days. The second thing that was recently invented was the cheap, small, portable cassette tape recorder. This cassette format has not been around for eternity. It had just been invented, and the cassettes were affordable and cheap, and you could use them and you could get a really accurate interview transcription. And you can also record the bands, which I've done both live. And so at first I thought of doing a publication that was just 8.5 by 11 Xerox stapled, but I began thinking about what do you really want to do? It's a good question to ask before you do something. Really, what do you really want to do? And can you afford it? And I realized that since there was a free newspaper tabloid sheet size circular every week from my local Rossi market, I said this must be really cheap. And I found out where the press was, and sure enough, it was affordable to do a large tabloid size publication. And because I was a huge fan of Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist from France, I said, I know, I'm going to try and do as much as possible all primary source interviews with the people who are creating this movement, because there isn't any textbook or manifesto or anything to tell you how to do it. It's being invented as you go, empirically. My model for publishing was the very earliest issues of Andy Warhol's Interview. I was a huge Andy Warhol fan. I'd seen the Velvet Underground with Warhol himself present at the Fillmore Auditorium, and even before then, I'd hitchhiked to New York City so I could see, I think it was Warhol's first huge art show of the disaster paintings of car crashes, plane crashes, the electric chair, etc. in New York. So Warhol's Interview magazine was done very cheaply. The text was typed out on an IBM Correcting Selectric 2 typewriter. I had a free one available at City Lights because they were like $1,000 back then. And I could use it all night. City Lights was a wonderful publishing host for me, and that's how I got going. And I started doing, just like Warhol, primary source interviews with as many of the most interesting, articulate people I could find as punk was just beginning. I knew that this was the next cultural revolution. I wanted to be there from the beginning and document it as much depth as possible and not dumb it down. I actually had specific objectives when I started in terms of editorial policy. I wanted to have very edited down, inspiring, concise, and rebellious interviews. I took my cassette tapes, but unlike Andy Warhol, I actually edited mine because I didn't want to lose a reader. I wanted to make sure that the reader's time was valuably spent and that every word would be, at least try to be, as inspirational and funny as possible. I also wanted just a few articles on topics like situationism, Dada, surrealism, black humor, revolution, and I eventually got these topics. So each issue, the main content was the interviews, but I also wanted quotations, reference lists of like records, books, even inventorying clothes people had made, because it was the days when you could buy clothes very cheap at thrift stores and rip them up and slogan them with stencils and spray paint. And you could also put in any kind of wild art you wanted because it's your publication. There weren't any rules. You weren't trying to look nice and bourgeois. It was quite the opposite. So what happened was almost immediately art students from San Francisco Art Institute or wherever they were from joined up, and I would give them some text and they could just do anything they wanted with their page. They could splatter ink on it, they could handwrite headlines, they could make cartoons, they could make drawings. Now, as Search and Destroy evolved, more and more people joined who were like super creative and made the publication much better. Photographers, artists, even other people who wanted to do interviews and who would take the work to transcribe them and edit them. And so essentially what would happen was we would bring columns of text in several sizes to a layout meeting. You'd have this huge sheet of paper and, you know, your rubber cement and pens and various kinds of thicknesses of pens to work with. And everyone was given a page or pair of pages to lay out that would be totally theirs. And we would probably, all of us occasionally review. We really didn't want to censor anyone's creativity, but we also had to make suggestions if we felt they were necessary so people could express themselves with minimum authoritarian interference. I wanted primary source material, interviews straight from the horse's mouth of musicians who actually wrote and played the songs. I wanted original artwork and photos by actual artists improvising in real time, mostly at our layout meetings. I wanted reference lists, but most of all, I didn't want any tamping down and dumbing down, and I didn't want any diluting of the spirit of rebellion and spontaneous creativity. But of course I wanted to have voices and interviews of people who weren't necessarily musicians, but who I thought had a lot to say, such as William Burroughs and J.G. Ballard, Russ Meyer, the filmmaker, John Waters, the filmmaker. Many of these people were doing work which might not be called specifically punk, but I felt in any case that punk was just only a tiny blip on the continuum, and that it really related to a much huger history and future history of cultural rebellion, cultural border crossing, cultural revolution, if you will. And I felt punk was part of this, and that's how it has its most meaning. I think that to totally understand why punk arose, you absolutely have to understand the state of culture just before, because punk was definitely a dialectical reaction to the way things were. I felt that rock music, which started out as rock and roll, the music of rebellion, the music of folk music by both black and white Americans, I felt that as a result of the 60s and the result of technology, of huge concert stagings and massive festivals, they were called then the Day on the Green. That was an early one. Woodstock was another. Because of this, there had become a totally impossible ideal had been foisted upon all young people of being able to play like the virtuosos Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and this is impossible for most of small young musicians starting out. And this took away the birthright of your self-expression, because folk music is not made by classically trained orchestrators. Folk music explains and articulates your needs. Punk rock for me was a revolution back to the very beginning of early rock and roll, when it started. You had no money, you just had a guitar maybe, you had minimal equipment, but you had something to say and you had some musical talent, and you could come up with a gripping, very simple tune. And as we know, the simplest tunes are the hardest ever to come up with. sometimes when something as incredible as a punk rock movement starts to happen in your own town, you of course are totally into it, and you take important things for granted. And what I took probably for granted the most at the time was the fact that a block away from where I live, an incredible club opened up called the Mabuhay Gardens. It was pretty much curated by an outsider from Germany named Dirk Dirksen, who I didn't even know 2 years later was gay, and he allowed any kind of show to go on without any aesthetic preconditions, except that you had to do the minimum amount of work. You had to submit a demo tape on cassette, and you had to submit an actual photograph of your so-called band or whatever it was. If you could do that much work, you could get at least one show there. And I think that's an amazing editorial policy. And because it's so important, I think, for humans to be in the same room sparking each other, starting this punk rock movement, and you can't just do it online, in my opinion, and get the incredible amount of randomness and chance encounters and input. I think our punk rock movement was certainly as rich as any one in any other city, perhaps more so, partly because we had a much larger percentage of gay outsiders living here, because San Francisco was known as the Gay Bay or the Gay Mecca. And outsiders are often the ones who are most original in creativity. They see things other people don't see. A lot of people think punk rock is just like the Ramones or some formula with 4 angry young white males with the lead singer, guitar player, bass player, and drummer formula playing as fast as possible. And that was not the way punk started in San Francisco. I think San Francisco was extraordinary because we had such a diversity. Now, my recollection of punk rock is that there were a lot more women in bands writing songs. Of course, there were gays, all kinds of outsiders, and also I think we had a wider age spread in our punk rock movement than, say, in Los Angeles, where it seemed like there were a lot more real teenagers. It was very hard back then, before the internet, to find out anything about punk rock. You knew it was happening, and you knew it was happening all over the world. And where did we get our ideas? I'd say from all the British weekly music newspapers, from just a very handful of publications that were liberal enough to include articles on the not codified punk rock movement, such as Zigzag magazine from England. Crawdaddy was quite important from New York because they had columns by William S. Burroughs, which I considered an amazing intellectual leap for a music publication. Village Voice occasionally, but not very often. Hardly any coverage in any San Francisco magazines. And like I said before, the coverage was mostly negative. And that's the real reason I wanted to publish. For me, the germinative principles behind punk rock are a little more complex than most people realize. Number one is obviously do it yourself. It's now become so commonly used, it's a phrase DIY. Secondly, I'd say anybody can do it. Anyone can do it. Almost the same, but not quite. Thirdly, think anti-authority, anti-hierarchical, but particularly anti-authoritarian. Fourth, be very afraid if you can't have black humor present. I think black humor is super important. Number 5 is the dimension of poetry and metaphor. I feel that absolutely any kind of creativity that humans can do must essentially be reduced to poetry and metaphor. I'm totally in a war against realism, against literalism. I don't think anything in life, including your relationship, is totally literal and real. everything must have a poetic dimension or it simply won't last. Now personally, I like the idea that Lautréamont said, which was poetry must be made by all. I would extend it to say a publication and print should be made by all. And finally, I like to call to mind Benjamin Franklin, who said something that I remember impacted me very much when I was a child. He said, freedom of the press belongs to the person who owns one.
Hello? Yes, here you go.
Sorry, I've launched into some self-generated monologue without giving, my propers to our wonderful people here who made this happen. And let's see, Sean here, I guess. He made me more copies of Goals of Life, and if there aren't enough, he'll probably make more for you, haha. And I wouldn't be here at all without Marion Wallace, who made the film. So, and lastly, this utter genius, Natasha Boas, who had the huge historical overarching universe consciousness, to invent this whole series and actually pull it off and let the university, host it. I mean, that's a feat in itself.
With Michael Cohen over here, my
Oh, yes.
co-professor.
Sorry, I didn't know Michael. I'm sorry, I didn't know Michael until just really a few minutes ago. Where are you? Thank you. There you are. Okay. So now one of the things I said is at the end I noticed, I'd kind of forgotten this film, was that publishing must be done by all. And I actually wish in grade school, everyone was forced to do a little zine. And the point being that they have 100% control over it. That's what's important. No one's going to tell you what not to put in your zine. That is super important. Even be wary of so-called friends that might try to censor you or interfere. It's important you at least do this once in your life. To me, this is like a rite of passage, or it's a real rite of passage in this so-called communication society we're in now that is, to me, information overload. And one of my points is I hope, in Goals of Life, is like, I really try hard. I know it's impossible when you're going to school, but I super try hard when I wake up to have an hour with no cell phone on, no internet, no computer, just me with a notebook and pen, and you just simply sit there in your bed, or in my case, sofa, covered by, of course, a blanket, because every San Francisco apartment, you freeze to death. And you just see what arises without censoring, and you try and just write any old thing down, even if it's shocking or disturbing. But whatever it is, you're the communicating vessel. You write it down in the notebook. And I don't see how you can become yourself without doing this. I mean, you're here to invent your own language, and that you need some solitude for. You see what arises. you try and come up with your own phrases. I play the game a lot, which I only invented a few years ago for me. I'm sure other people invent it. But it's just fun to see how many rhymes can possibly generate if you're with someone, or come up with little 3-word phrases. You know, like this person, this young woman did a comic on me, and 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 she called it a 3-word phrase, search for weird. And I like that. I mean, she's an outsider to me, and that's what she came up with. But I guess the point of that is things that are really weird and interesting and outsider and possibly will spark you. A lot of this doesn't just come to you unless you're in, Natasha's class, haha. I mean, you have to search for the weird things that happened in history, or even weird things going on in science. Because one of my little morale-building phrases is that everyone is an artist and a scientist. And there must be something else, too. We're all comedians, maybe? I'm not that funny, sorry. But yeah, we're all, I don't know, if you're John Law up there, you're also a mechanic who can fix a car. And, it's just, you just don't, it's a lifetime quest. I mean, you guys are students nominally, but you will be students all your life, really. And it's a lifetime quest to find out what the heck all your talents are, and then start developing them. And you only develop them through deeds, not words. Oh, and that's another thing. I'm kind of, even though I'm talking like mad, I have a huge distrust of language and logic because I'm a huge fan of intuition. Like, you just meet a stranger, within 1 second, if they say a few words, I swear you can judge them in like 1/10 of a second, and you're probably right on. And anyway, there's a lot of little, I like to kind of I put a bunch of my ideas in this little $5 zine down here called Terminal Punk. But anyway, because we're all working on what you call a philosophy of life until you're dead, I hope. I mean, everyone's a philosopher. I think it's fun to try to be an anthropologist. And also, I don't consider what I do as journalism. Like I said, I hate the word because it's so formulaic. They need a snappy beginning and a snappy ending, and it has to be shocking. I'm so against that. I try to be a historian, sort of dispassionate, and I try to use minimalist language. Yeah. Although, anyone here, I'm sure everyone's also a poet in this room. And you can all let yourself go in that first hour of the morning with your notebook and pen. Super important not to censor whatever comes out. You might be surprised. Oh, and dreams are fantastic. I always said everyone's an artist, and you can prove it because everyone has had dreams. And in the dream, you're the scriptwriter, you're the caster, you're the interior decorator, you're the costumer, the hairstylist. I mean, everything in that dream was created by you, the artiste. So if that doesn't prove to you you're an artist, I don't know what is. And then we're all scientists because we want to know how the world really works without any BS. We want to know the real deal of what's going on behind, I don't know, the Trump media bullshit landscape and all that. Or maybe you like Trump. I actually know people who do, but their reasons are very curious. And but anyway, back to punk rock, and it's all about inspiration. We're only here really on this planet to inspire each other if we can. I mean, why else would we be here? We're here to do stuff, and it's just important just not to be a consumer all your life. You have to do something, even if it's just even if it's writing in your notebook. But then, like I said, try and make a cheap zine. A zine can be just one sheet of paper folded down a bunch of times, or it can be just folded once. Like sometimes I'm so lazy. I guess Goals of Life is a kind of zine on one sheet. And so I think I'm monopolizing this too much. I mean, look at all these interesting people up here with actual functioning brains in real time. I mean, I have a lot to say because I want to encourage students just to really light a fire under themselves and do something they've never done before, or at least think about ideas like this. And I mean, I have weird ideas about identity, like who we are. Like, I know we're all machines because none of us have, direct, logical, verbal control over our metabolism functioning that digests our food. I don't think we can control that. I think that makes me a machine. I mean, a machine filled with liquid. Ah, what a horrible image. But we are machines that we don't have control over a lot of functions. I think we're also all reptiles, and the example I give of this is that I was looking at an aquarium at 7 o'clock at night and watching these incredible fluorescent, day-glow fish moving around, and suddenly someone tapped me on the shoulder and I whirled around in fight mode. I hadn't heard them, but that's what I'd call a reptilian response. And I think we're all mammals too, because most of us like to, hug or cuddle or something, like cats do, or maybe dogs, I don't know. But we're mammalian. I mean, hell, we all got breast milk, didn't we? Jesus. I guess that's one of the signature characteristics of being a mammal, right? And then we're also rarely human. Humans invented language. Humans invented E equals MC squared, which, is that going to kill the planet or not, that one? Maybe. But, I'm a fan of big picture thinking as much as it shows up in my notebook in the morning. And I search for words. I only got a smartphone a year ago, and I use it immediately to Google a word that I don't know, of which there are like zillions. And but I don't know. I find that the biggest battle in my life has been keeping that iPhone at bay. I think because it's so addicting, and I keep it on silent, so don't try and message me and get an instant response. But you can. Everyone in this room, you could message me if you wanted. I'm super easy to find. But don't expect an immediate response. It's not because I don't like you or anything. It's just that the damn thing's off. And so I'm supposed to tell you a little bit about counterculture, focusing on punk because I lived it. But you saw most of my ideas or recollections in that film. Wow, what an energy saver. But what I haven't written about is my days in the hippie movement, naively joining a band called Blue Cheer, which is now called the father of heavy metal. But heavy metal to me was just dumbed down blues. I mean, we were just young kids trying to imitate the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, who really were scholars, and who really were good, and who really were super musicians. But we couldn't play that well. And then I found out later, after I met Michael Bloomfield, that guy has like this enormous wall of rare blues records from all over the world, and books on blues. And this is like a million years ago when these things were super hard to find. And he knew enough that a huge part of live performance is what you call possession, which we're never taught in school hardly, or being possessed by the duende. It's some spirit. It's probably, I mean, I'm trying to channel everyone in the room. It's my fantasy, I realize, but we're, if you get possessed, sometimes you can do things that you don't know you could do until suddenly you're doing it. And when you're doing it, like Mike Bloomfield playing an incredible guitar solo improvisation, you're not even there hardly. You're just caught up. You got possessed, and you went with it. You didn't say no to it. You let yourself go there. And I think that's probably a very exhilarating feeling, which everyone ought to try, I suppose. I read books on flamenco, and a lot of the greatest flamenco was never recorded because it was done in little villages on the coast of Spain or something. But I just was so impressed that in the society you had the support. You could let yourself go and be possessed and sing more great. Well, a famous story was this guy Manuel de Huelva. He was called the greatest flamenco singer ever. A male, I know. He's not a female. My favorite are females, but that's another story. And then of course he died. But Manuel de Huelva had a brother who had never sang, but only once he got up in his little village and sang, and everyone said, God, he was really great. And he only did it that one time where he got possessed, and it was sort of a legendary story. So the good thing about the hippie movement was it was mostly all white, like the society of the time. And I say that slightly ironically. But for me personally, the hippie movement was just a few hundred people. It's not thousands. Just like our early punk movement was less than 200 people for 2 years, I'm positive. You knew everyone by their first name if you didn't know their full name. And I swear, for me, this nothing Asian male growing up in a tiny all-white town, the hippie movement for me was a demonstration of, you're gonna laugh, like, what? No race prejudice against me? I mean, I experienced it. And even though, I have to admit I grew up in mostly white culture because I read all the time. And what I read was mostly generated by, let's face it, white males. I'm sorry to say that. Of course, some of my biggest influence are women, my favorites at least, like painters like Remedios Varo and Leonora Carrington and Dorothea Tanning. They're called Surrealist Women, but they're just amazing. Surrealists were amazing because they sort of demanded that everyone not only paint and draw, but also write and channel surrealist poetry and narratives, whatever. So I consider surrealism a super rich source for anyone out there who wants to, be more creative, which I hope is everyone in the room. And so what Natasha's done is try to, make you aware that we're kind of in a continuum, and nothing is isolated. Everything draws from the past, and it's really fun to, for example, research the whole history of what I would call countercultures, or dissenting thought, or I heard Natasha raised the question of what's the difference between a subculture and a counterculture, and we don't necessarily have to go there. Well, it's obviously the word choice is a difference, but the spirit is really, just trying to be creative and pretty much being creative, I think, demands going against some kind of status quo or perceived set of aesthetic standards. You know, you have to make these decisions for yourself, you know, on your own, you know, with hopefully you have at least one friend to discuss things like this with. It really helps. And so I had a beatnik uncle and a beatnik dad. It's all just accident, chance. But I did want to be a beatnik when I was really young, and my uncle brought me both a copy of Howl and a copy of the Life magazine, the first huge feature on the beatniks. And I remember, like, as soon as I could, I and this other weirdo in my small town, we'd pretend we were beatniks, and we'd like pretend we were reciting Howl to each other. I know, pathetic, but and then, of course, when the hippie thing happened, I was at UC Berkeley, and there was another underground that is pretty much undervalued, and I think it's the folk music underground. It was right here. I lived through that at UC Berkeley, and you know, I was one of the people bringing a guitar to what do you call it, Sprawl Plaza. And joining other people trying to write our pathetic folk songs. Yeah, and you know, and actually Bob Dylan wasn't so famous then. I mean, I was like, my big influence was Kingston Trio and Peter, Paul and Mary. Then Berkeley's so sophisticated that then I found out about all these other people. Well, they came and played. Pete Seeger, you know, Malvina Reynolds, Joan Baez. Malvina Reynolds did a funny song called Little Boxes, if you've never heard it. Joan Baez had this amazing voice, so she was amazing. All these people started a folk music movement here at UC Berkeley, but really there weren't that many people. It's sort of like about the number of people in this room who were aware of it. But it was kind of great, and of course, 800 students being arrested at Sprawl Hall. Oh, I would have been one of them, but I left at 5 a.m. And the reason I did is because I was wearing this horrible invention technology called hard contact lenses. And this is back in the days when everybody smoked. You know, like this room would be filled with cigarette smoke back then. And it was legal. And the smoke just killed my eyeballs. I had to leave. I know, it sounds like a cop-out, but it's true. You know, we're slaves to our bodies, and our bodies drive our minds. Sometimes the reverse. Go ahead, Natasha.
Oh, I wanted to, first of all, see if there are any students who wanted to ask you a question, and then we were going to move on to Marion's film, and then move on to more Q&A. So is there anyone in the audience who'd like to interact with Vale?
Preferably a student.
As a performative experience?
This has more to do with your publications. I was wondering how much you're digitizing old publications and how far you'll go, because you said you wanted to make it more available to like the public. Like everyone's a publisher, so I was wondering how you're bringing like digitizing things.
Oh, we're so lame and so late and all that. You could help. You could come over to San Francisco and help.
I'll come. Do you need me? I'm serious.
It definitely takes some work. Sorry.
I also had a question. I just happened to be sitting right next to her. So, you were talking a little bit about, or in the film, about in San Francisco, the DIY scene that was breaking out, like in the midst of the punk movement, and how specifically in San Francisco it kind of encompassed a lot of different age groups and women as well. And that one venue, the Mabuhay Gardens, how it was like, I guess a really open venue, and it really allowed a lot of artists to get the exposure that they wanted.
At
And
least once.
yeah, and I'm not from the Bay, and I grew up in LA, and I think seeing the DIY scene there similarly encompass so many different age groups and so many different like races, and give them the exposure that they needed, and have spaces to play for all ages events, and just like really garner that kind of community. But then sadly see a lot of those venues, I can't speak for the Bay, but for LA especially, kind of being shut down, or just don't have the money to keep that going anymore. And I was wondering if you're seeing a similar story happening in the Bay with all those DIY venues, or how you see that going, like what direction it's moving in now.
I know our big enemy is the real estate enterprise lobby, because if you think you don't have to think very hard to realize, sadly, that your number one expense every month is rent. I mean, I don't own a place, but getting that rent together is hard. And they say in your lifetime, the biggest expense you'll ever have is buying a house, and the second is buying a car. And so all I can say is that there are some plucky people, and it's usually, and this is like an encouragement to everyone to do something, because I find a lot of the most amazing things are really spearheaded by, I hate to say one person, but it often is one person, obviously, rallying their friends too to help. So, like the Smell in LA has been a punk venue for a long time, and I hope it's still there. That's all I can say. It has a funny name, The Smell. That's what I heard on. You have to. I don't know. I sure don't want to move to, North Dakota or some godforsaken place. Or I shouldn't say that. That'll hurt the feelings of North Dakotans. But it's a problem. Like everyone I know, I've known so many people that moved to Oakland, but now they're all moving to Richmond. Like, what? So I don't know how to answer that. I wish. I just try and rent a place you can do stuff at. And if it can't be super loud punk rock, then make it punk rock unplugged or something.
Can you tell the history of the Mabuhay Gardens as a restaurant? Yeah, as a
Yeah, it's all chance and accident, like so many great things in life. We used to, where I live, used to be on the very edge of what they called Manila Town, or it was a Filipino small community, totally adjacent to and abutting what they called Chinatown, which now I guess I'm in Chinatown, because all the Italians who sold their buildings to Chinese people around me, so mostly. And so this club used to have a lot of support, but it just dwindled as people died or whatever. I mean, there were like a number of hotels right 2 blocks from me that cater, and I like these hotels. They're called SROs, single room occupancy, but a lot of Filipino bachelors lived in them, and they could afford it. And they were, I think, they weren't dumb enough to work all the time, or whatever you call it. I mean, let's put it another way. The rent was so low that you could have leisure time to be creative and, just do your own thing. But as these people died out, I think the attendance dropped at this Filipino supper club, and it was just chance that several people happened to cross it and made a proposal. Well, if we put on some entertainment here, why don't you keep all the food money and we'll keep the door money, or something like that. Everything has to have an economic basis. I'm sorry to, Karl Marx, economics determines life. Well, sadly, that's still true, I guess. And so, I don't know, just there always has to be new people coming up who aren't afraid to start something, make something happen. And it just takes one person, and maybe you can't expect anything to last forever, but you do your best while you're in the grip of enthusiasm and you start something. And I mean, I talked about punk rock, but punk rock gave birth to a lot of other movements, which I still call punk, like industrial, for example. I mean, those people were there at the beginning of punk. People doing what you call noise music and industrial music. And then, of course, the goth scene, well, that totally came out of punk. It's just more specialized in black clothing and makeup and Bauhaus songs like Bela Lugosi's Dead. And then you have people like John Law up there starting Burning Man, which is a DIY thing. And that's like totally... it's definitely, I don't know. They didn't have a class in that at UC Berkeley ever. Start your own Burning Man. I suppose John could teach one. And
Yeah, John, do you have some comments for the audience?
Your own Burning Man.
right on.
Involved in that a long time.
Correct.
Great thing, a lot of fun, and people were involved in it. We didn't have any money, and we just did what we wanted to, and didn't do what we were supposed to do.
That was early Burning Man, not Burning
Early.
Man today, right?
and I might add that in terms of these rebel social movements, of which you guys start your own mini movement, your own smell club. She's on her cell phone. I was talking to her, but it's okay. Oh. But the point is that we're all here to really make things happen. And I find that all the movements I've been involved in, they're always more fun at the beginning. That's all I can say.
That's true. That's my experience as well. The underground. Do we want to move on to Marion's film, which was... Do you want to cue it up? This is a film that was inspired by Bruce Conner. And the students, in sort of a magical loop in this class, we started out with a short lecture on Bruce Conner at the beginning of the semester, if you guys remember. And what you'll find here are a lot of Marion's, the strategies, the visual strategies from her work at SFAI and with Bruce Conner, and she can talk to you a little bit about that. Found footage and a certain type of editing. So I think we're going to have a 7-minute film? 8-minute film by Marion. Thank you.
I think if you turn the lights down, I can manage. I think it'll start the second I let go here. Now Doug's up there. Is he going to turn the lights down, or are you?
He's on his phone.
No, he's right there.
House lights. Oh, you're asking for the lights. You guys speaking to the microphone. I couldn't hear.
Oh.
For the projection of the film for 8 minutes. Thanks.
I'm not sure, but it might pop on and it might be some weirdness, so we'll try.
True. true, whether not, it's true, whether not, it's true, whether.
Thank you, Marion. Let's see if there are any questions about. Come on up, you guys. Let's have a few more minutes. We have a few more minutes, and I just want to keep probing our students as we enter into our last couple weeks to sort of, after we've digested all of these different presentations, if you have some more questions to pose. And then otherwise up in the audience, is there anyone who'd like to participate? Oh, here.
I'm just curious, where did the music in the film come from? Like, did you make it or? Yeah, okay.
Oh, yes. I am the author of the music and the performer.
Hey, Marion, I'm in the audience over here, standing up against the wall. Hi. I'm also an SFAI graduate. Woo, go SFAI. I just had a little bit of, could you discuss your process a little bit in terms of making your film? It seemed like a lot of it may or may not have been used footage or found footage. Do you typically shoot your own footage? And could you talk a little bit about if it is found, why, or the purpose of it?
And how you're editing it now, because it's found footage that's 16 millimeter. Are you doing digital, or are you going straight back to film?
Well, actually, I found most of that footage in my own bins of unused footage. The part with the wheel running across, that was actually a little film I made way back when. It was called The Great Wheel Chase. And those, I think, were the alternate takes. And I just strung them together. Originally, I think I made the soundtrack for Bruce and for his opening. And I wanted to show some footage with it. So I went into my old boxes of film and I found 16 millimeter, and I had a projector that projects at, I think it's 12 or less frames per second, and I just shot it with video off the wall because I wanted to try the footage. And I liked the footage. Actually, it's all found except for the Army thing. Some Steve Parr from Oddball Cinema just handed me that one night years ago, and I still had it. It's an ad for the Army, obviously. So I put it together with the sound, only to realize that I couldn't really use the film anymore because it was the wrong speed. So I just turned it into a video. That's why it's a little keystoned. Did you notice? Because I just projected it with this little projector about that far from the wall, and I shot it with a video camera. So now you know all my secrets. Right.
I just find it really interesting because it seemed like you had shot footage in that sort of video within a video. I find interesting.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Did I answer you, Babalu?
You recorded it with a digital video camera. So, but did you splice that whole thing together with 16 millimeter film and then kind of edit it and just transfer it?
No. I shot each piece individually, and I put it together with Final Cut Pro 7. Yeah.
I have a question for, in the front. I have a question for Vale. You talked a little bit about anti-consumerism. So I was just wondering, in terms of Search and Destroy, when you first started it, you mentioned that there weren't that many people who really knew about the punk scene. So I want to talk about maybe your audience for Search and Destroy, and how you, like, what spaces did you disseminate it in, and how do people like come to find your publication?
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. No one's ever asked me that before. Speaking of, I still have, sadly, Search and Destroys for sale here for $20 each. I do take credit cards. Because there wasn't that big of an audience. You know, you do 3,000 to 5,000 print run because it's cheap. It's cheap to do 3 or 5 as it is 1, and then they stay in your house forever. But I don't know. Punk seems to have some legs. In other words, people who weren't even born then in '77 can be interested because we hope they do their own punk movement, so to speak, at their own version of the smell. Maybe they can call it the taste. I'm talking to her, you, and anyway, like I said, we really are here to try to inspire each other to do something, not just consume. And it was situationism that way back in '73, I was late finding out about it, but then I just found out everything I could super fast. Like I've got 4 big boxes of situationist ephemera and stuff that were really hard to get starting in '73, and they were railing against consumerism, mindless consumerism, and anyway, well, so I try to keep my consumerism in check personally. I try not to go to stores. I don't know. I'm pretty pathetic. Yeah, try is the word, and good luck with that. Okay.
It would be great for you to discuss with these people a little bit about your philosophy about print material, once again versus digital, because I know that you're very much into the process of your books, and talk a little bit about how you are now printing and distributing your books.
Well, I like, you know, Madonna made this song about I'm a material girl living in a material world, and I would adopt that too with a slight alteration. And I like to give people things or hand people things, and I have to admit it, I like the tactileness of a book because I use a pencil to mark up all my books because that way if you F up you can erase it. But I feel that this all helps you remember what you read. I mean, I think I can remember something on paper better than something just on a screen, personally. And it's so easy now to do a book. Like you don't, because of all this computer-free programs and everything, you can just look at YouTube videos and learn how to produce a very slick-looking book from start to finish. But I recommend starting small with a zine. And it just takes a lot of time and work and tons of proofreading, and everyone who comes over, make them proofread your zine before you put it out. Because I hate typos. But I try to, hey, I went to UC Berkeley. I mean, come on. I try to have some kind of high standard for my publishing. And you follow, but that doesn't, if you can't spell, don't let that stop you from doing something. I mean, the important thing is that you publish something that with 100% control and that's not watered down by your friends or anyone.
Institutions.
Or institutions. And it just takes a hell of a lot of, look, you strive to get better at everything you do every day. It's all in my goals of life thing. That's my entire life on one sheet of paper. And, you try to get better and you try and get your friends to help because, geez, it sure makes it more fun than you toiling away alone in the wilderness. And
real friends, not Facebook friends.
That's thank you, real friends. Well, that's you find out, like Burroughs said, you only get to truly know someone if you work with them. Think about that.
I think we've got 2 more questions and then we'll have to wrap it up. But thanks.
Thanks. This is a really interesting talk. And Vale, you're a total boon to this curriculum that you lived through beatnik, hippie, folk music, punk, post-punk, Burning Man, and surrealism. I wanted to ask you about the personalities that are core to these movements. I had a specific question. I wonder if the people who started the MAB, if any of them were in the hippie or folk art music, and then anything you two want to say about San Francisco and the countercultures that come out of here.
Well, I'll say that San Francisco used to be this big countercultural magnet. I'm not sure if it is now, because I know that the word disruption is very popular now among everyone in Silicon Valley doing a startup. And I kind of wonder if punk DIY gave birth to the originality of all these Silicon Valley startups. I mean, there's not no connection there. And being disruptive, that, you know, and everyone's adopting the language that used to be, I identified with sort of social counterculture. It's all co-opted now by people that I don't feel are my best friends. I mean, the term alt-right, for example. I don't want to get into politics, but I feel that every time you see the word alt-right, immediately convert right to Reich, R-A-I-C-H. Bad joke. Anyway, I don't know. Everything changes all the time, but you just need one friend, really, to start with, and maybe you'll attract more, and then maybe you'll start your own movement. And as far as the Mabuhay goes, Filipino culture is extremely gracious, I found, living it. And they're extremely giving and extremely tolerant. And they didn't care what music or what anyone said, as long as they, you know, bought a few dinners there and helped pay their rent. They're very supportive, is what I'm saying. And non-judgmental, that's the word I was searching for. I think we must all try to be non-judgmental about what we don't understand. I mean, surely, and not just be afraid of what we don't understand. But it's important, try to eventually do something. That's, you know, and a zine is a good start, one page.
This question is for Marion. I was wondering if you two are a material girl. What is the difference between your relationship with celluloid versus digital? Do you prefer the material artifact?
Yes, I do, actually. The synthesizer I'm using now, though, I did find as a result of doing that type of soundtrack physically with tape and cutting it and playing it backwards and fidgeting with it. And someone who saw one of my films, it said, you know, there's a module you can get now to do that. and I'm like, wow, okay. Huh? Yeah, so I went to get the module, and of course they handed me the circuit board with a bunch of wires hanging out, and I was like, what? And they said, oh, don't you have a system? So I had to buy the box and all the other little mixers and other things. So yeah, well, you buy a bunch so you can do something. Then I've been adding on, and it's called a Euro rack system, which they nickname Euro crack, because there's always one more module you need. But I actually I do like working with the film, and it seems easier to go like to a venue like this, and you hand them your reel of films, and someone plays them, and you turn it up or down. And here you're all like, oh, is this gonna play or not? I better bring a DVD too, and you bring it like in 5 different ways to make sure one of them works. Anyway, I do like the film and winding it and all that, and it's filthy. You can tell I did wind it around a lot, but it's real dirt. It's not, now you can put scratches on in Photoshop, I think.
Oh, no.
Is that answer? Yeah.
All right, we have another question from a student.
This is a question for Vale. You were talking earlier about how there were a lot of female role models in the punk scene, but from my perspective now, it seems like a mostly
male-dominated space. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the transition from an open environment to kind of an exclusive one.
Well, you know, what I'm about to say might not please you, but I'm pretty much oriented toward, it's crazy, I suppose, but I'm pretty much oriented much more to seeking out women artists than men these days. So there's a lot of women in my universe that maybe you haven't heard of. I don't know how I find out. People like you tell me about them. And then I go find I'm ashamed to do this, I find their video on YouTube and maybe correspond with them and things like that. And yes, I think we lucked out having so many gays and women be the leaders and songwriters of our, I'm only talking about the first year and a half of punk, because that's all I was really involved in. And I won't tell you what happened later, but it was one word, macho, came in. And there's a lot that you can find out if you really set your mind to only seeking out women artists and musicians, which is, I'm ashamed to admit it, I guess, but that's what I consciously do for quite a while. I did this book that's sadly out of print. I did all the text for it, labored over it, called Angry Women, and a lot of people liked the book at the time. Oh, thank you. And so we have to do, starting with you, each one of us, we have to do what we can to like make it a more women-run world or something, a world in which women are more creative and are supported, you know, and in charge. Hell yeah. Oh, I have to put it. If anyone wants to buy anything here, if you don't have any money, I do take credit cards, and I'll give you a discount if you need it, because I'm not here to just profiteer off the stuff that I created. But, you know, I want you to read it, and I hope some inspiration maybe is still forthcoming from these material objects. Sorry for that.
So thank you so much to Vale and Marion, and please come on down and continue the conversations up here. Thank you so much to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.